Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine DeSalle, and I will be sharing with you some of the components of the TPACK and SMR framework. So, TPACK and SMR for designing employee training. Why should you adopt the TPACK and SAMR framework into your employee training design? So here's why. Increased employee performance equals revenue, high revenue. In most companies, the main goal is to drive revenue. However, according to research that I found, increased employee performance is needed in order to achieve that. So here's a company called McKinsey and Company. It's actually a strategy and finance company. So their job is to do research and to figure out ways to increase revenue, and they're sort of a consulting company for corporations. So this is what they have, the information they've given us. So it says systems based on metrics don't take sufficient notice of the real engines of wealth creation today. What is that? It's knowledge, okay, which is provided to employees through training or effective training, relationships, and reputations, and other intangibles created by talented people, right? Those talented people, meaning the employees, who are obviously talented more when they have the proper training, and represented by investments in such activities as R&D, marketing, and training. So the two frameworks that we will discuss today are TPACK and SAMR. Those are the two frameworks that we should use when creating our training for employees. Okay, so here's the main points that we're going to highlight today about TPACK and SAMR. Okay, so first, these two are used in unison to create optimal training results. Remember, just keep in mind that it says optimal, because we can have training, but if it's not optimal, that means that we're not getting the best results. That means we're not maximizing the resources that we have. And it also obviously has to be effective, because if it's not effective, it's sort of a waste of time, and the employees are not grasping the learning objectives that we need them to grasp. Also, it increases the effectiveness of employee training. These two frameworks creates opportunities for transformational learning, and transformational learning is when we take our learning through different learning experiences, engagement, high engagement, being able to apply to real world examples, and then being able to apply it, the information that was learned, and actually put it into practice. That way it becomes transformational. That way it leaves from the active learning part of our brains into the transformational part, which is when it becomes sort of more permanent. All right, so let's talk about TPACK first. TPACK, it's used again in unison with this SMAR to create optimal learning results. It increases engagement and retention of content, which is what we want to do. All right, so how do we use the TPACK framework to design courses? All right, so TPACK framework, there's three main components. The first component is technology. So what are we using to integrate the use of technology, the use of digital tools? Pedagogy, that is this kind of sort of the study or practice. It's teaching practices. So what kind of strategies are we using? And those strategies, I'll go into that later. Each depends on your audience and your content, but depends on your pedagogy. So it takes some research there. And then content. What are we teaching at the core of the training? What is being taught? What skills are being taught? So three main components: technology, pedagogy, content. Okay, so let's talk about technology first. Okay, so technology. So we have a certain set of learning objectives. We have certain skills we want our employees to learn. We have materials and resources and text and everything that we want to teach the employees. But how are we going to, this is one of the components of TPACK, we have to make sure that we are incorporating the use of digital tools. So which digital tools will we use for this particular training? That's the question that we want to ask ourselves as um, instructional designers of a particular course. Which digital tools am I going to use? Now, going back to this framework, these three components are sort of a blend. They are connected. They're like a puzzle. Um, so we have to, although I am talking about technology, I'm going to start talking about pedagogy as well, and even content, because they are all connected. Okay. So when I say technology, and I ask myself which digital tools am I going to use for this particular training? Well, first, let me just go ahead and say this. So we use technology. I'm asking myself which tools am I going to use? Also, just please note that the digital tools are going to help us to create that high engagement and in those interactions within the learning community, which is very important to establish. Okay. Now, moving on. Again, in mind, I'm asking myself which digital tools am I going to use? But I have to also consider the content that I am teaching, because that content will tell me which digital tools are going to be feasible for this particular training. And more specifically, remember they are connected, the pedagogies, okay? What's the content that I am teaching? What is the audience that I am teaching? Sorry, the content, and what is the audience, who's the audience that I am teaching, because that would also determine which digital tools am I going to use. So depending on my audience, depending on what I am teaching, I have to consider the pedagogies of that particular, and this is a pedagogy, let's go back to pedagogies. I have to consider the pedagogy for that particular audience and for that particular content. So let's see what it says about pedagogy. Will the digital tools, remember that's the technology, will the digital tools being used allow for best practices? Okay, that's pedagogy, best practices for teaching my specific audience. So if I am teaching adults versus children, or am I teaching an audience with certain needs or accommodations, or am I teaching an audience who has more of a background in the content that I'm going over? So pedagogy, it tells me what are the best practices for this audience. Also, what are the best practices for this particular content that I am teaching? Okay. And so when I consider that, I have that in mind when I'm asking myself, hey, which digital tools am I going to use that's going to be feasible for me to keep this pedagogy in mind and best practices in mind? And then content. Okay, so have I closely studied and fully understand the information? Okay, because at the core of it all, of the training, is the content. And so we have to make sure that we are fully aware and we fully understand the content that we're teaching, because we do not want to misinform. So if we're not experts in this field, and even if we are, we should probably collaborate with an expert and obviously do research. And so it says, have I made a plan to focus on specific information or skills needed to acquire for the learning objectives of this course? So also, when we consider hand in hand the content, making sure that we are fully aware and fully understand the content, and we're reaching out to experts in that area and collaborating. Just as important as that is to make sure that we have specific learning objectives, because we could kind of get off course if we don't have sort of I guess we can call it a plan, or maybe a map, or just kind of the bones of the training should be the learning objectives. It should all be centered around the learning objectives. Okay, so one more time, TPACK framework again. The components are technology, pedagogy, and content, and those are all connected. All right, so moving on to SAMR. Okay, so again, this is used in unison with TPACK. Again, it's to create optimal training results. Now, this model is sort of a linear model, and ultimately, it leads to transformation of learning content. It has 4 components, and each component builds on the previous. Again, SAMR is used in unison with TPACK to create optimal results, and this is more of a linear model. And remember, each component builds on another. There's 4 components: substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. Okay, so substitution. Substitution is when we switch out one ingredient for another. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Noah, 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 turn it down, baby. So substitution is when we substitute one. So I'm gonna use a recipe, kind of sort of a dish, a food dish, to just kind of make this a little bit more visual. So we all know when we substitute something, we just kind of take whatever it is and uh, take whatever it is and substitute it simply for something else, just to make it very simple. So if I'm making a lasagna dish, right? It's still gonna be lasagna, right? But instead of me making this dish, I'm gonna use everything. Everything's gonna be the same, except I'm gonna switch out the ground beef for ground turkey. Okay, it's still lasagna. It's still the same. If we're talking about a training, it's the same lesson, same content, same material. Everything's the same. It even looks the same, but it's just one ingredient switched out. And so then when we think about a training course, remember the main focus is to keep TPACK in mind along with SMR, right? So when we're thinking about SMR and we're thinking about TPACK, if we substitute something out of a course, it's going to be, maybe an example would be to substitute maybe a worksheet or an activity that is intended to actually write down, like with pen and paper, but we substitute that and we maybe make a Google document out of it. So that would be substitution. Okay, so moving on to augmentation. Think of augmentation, making things greater, right? Bigger. So augmentation. I'm going to take that same turkey lasagna, right? Because I've substituted out from beef to ground turkey. So now I have ground turkey. So remember, this is building. Okay, so we're going to build with each component. Okay, so first we substituted. Now we're on augmentation. So now we have this ground turkey, right, that I've substituted out. So now I have ground turkey. Now I'm going to augment. I'm going to make it better, right? And so now I'm going to take this ground turkey and I'm going to use organic ground turkey, and I'm even going to add a little salad with it. So now it's augmented. It's still the same ground turkey, same lasagna. I'm just making it a little bit better. So in terms of that same worksheet, right, for our training that we've taken and we've made a Google document out of it, now we are going to take this Google document, right, and maybe we can add pictures to it, right, or maybe we can add pictures to it, or maybe we can create a link to open up a Google slide with some videos. Okay, so we're just making it better. All right, now modify. All right, modify is when we actually change something, right? We take something, whatever it is, and we change it. So for the purposes of this lasagna recipe, we're going to take this lasagna, right? This ground turkey lasagna, and we're going to make it a seafood lasagna. So I am not using ground beef, ground turkey, or anything. It's a completely different dish now, right? It's well, not completely different yet, but I am modifying it. Okay, so now I have seafood instead of beef, right? So now I have this. Now, if I were to take the training example, right? I've taken the worksheet, I've made it digital. Then after that, I added pictures and I added a link to for a Google slide with videos. Okay, so now I'm going to modify this, and I am going to make um, I'm going to make my students actually turn in maybe their answers. They can turn it in on a Google Doc, or maybe they can do a video and of their responses. So it's different. I'm modifying it. Okay, so now redefine. Redefine is when I take it and I make a completely different. It's a completely different dish now. So let me take that seafood lasagna, and now I'm going to make it into actually a seafood lasagna roll. So now it's a different dish, right? And in that same worksheet that I've added online and made it digital and did the videos, and I had my students respond by with their answers with the video. Okay, now I'm going to make them actually design a Google slide explaining all of the content that I've taught them. So now instead of them responding, they're going to actually come up with a Google slide as if they were the teacher to teach the class, right? So now it's completely redefined. I hope that you enjoyed this training. Thank you. Here's my works cited for all of the resources that I used, mainly the resources that was given in the course and then the McKinsey research that I did on my own.